Welcome to the Legal Influence Podcast, a show for influencers and content creators looking to land brand deals and grow thriving businesses legally. I'm your host, Kate Cooper. I'm an attorney and content creator who combine my professional backgrounds to create a legal education business for other content creators. In today's episode, I'm going to share some tips for negotiating brand deals. If you're an influencer or content creator who feels intimidated when it comes to negotiating, but you want to start landing better brand deals, then this episode is for you. Before I dive into today's episode, though, I do have to provide some quick disclaimers. Nothing I share today should be considered legal advice. Everything is for educational and informational purposes only. While I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney, and listening to this episode doesn't create an attorney-client relationship between you and I. So today I'm going to be talking about brand deal negotiation. So first I'm going to talk about who should provide the first number when you're negotiating a brand deal. And then I'm going to share some general negotiation tips. So I often talk about making sure that your brand deals are mutually beneficial, and that requires you to feel confident negotiating your rate and the terms of your partnerships. So going into the brand deal negotiation process, I like to think of 3 different buckets that need to be filled before you have a final deal and can move on to signing a contract. So you have the deliverables for the brand deal, the terms of the brand deal, so that includes things like usage or exclusivity, and then you have the compensation for the brand deal. And all of those buckets are potentially negotiable. Of course, every brand deal is going to be a little bit different. Some brands are going to have more flexibility than others, but I think looking at these 3 things as separate buckets makes the negotiation process a little bit easier and helps you end up with a final deal that is mutually beneficial and something that you're happy with. So for example, if during the negotiation process, the brand needs to take away from the compensation bucket because they have a limited budget, that just means that you need to look at adjusting the deliverables or the terms to see if you can balance those buckets out. Now, a common question that comes up when negotiating brand deal rates is who should provide the first number? Should the brand provide their budget first, or should the creator provide their rate first? And often when you're looking at negotiation tips, the typical advice is to never provide the first number. And I personally don't really agree with that, especially in the context of a brand deal in most situations. And I'll touch on an exception to that later. But that opening number is going to set the tone for the negotiation. But remember, that's not necessarily the final number. The rate is just one of 3 major buckets that make up the deal. So the negotiation process itself is really more important than who puts out that first number. So in my opinion, I think if a brand is hiring a creator as a freelancer, then it's appropriate for the creator to provide their rate based on the scope of the work that the brand is looking for. So the brand tells the creator about the deliverables and the terms of the campaign and fills those 2 buckets, and then you as the creator provide your rate, so you fill that 3rd bucket. And I think this helps set you up for a mutually beneficial partnership because each party gets to control their own bucket, set the terms on their end of the agreement, and this opens the door for the other party to then negotiate those terms, as opposed to a situation where one party sets all of the terms and controls all of the buckets, which puts the other party in a position where they're responsible for negotiating everything. And especially if you're a single creator working with a large company, it can feel like there's an inequitable balance of power, and from a resource perspective, there often is during a brand deal, but that doesn't mean that the brand deal shouldn't be mutually beneficial. So another reason that I like creators to provide the rate is because oftentimes, especially with bigger campaigns, you're typically working with a PR company, and the PR company has a budget for the overall campaign that they're allocating amongst a number of different influencers or creators. And so they may not have a firm number for you personally. It's up to you to tell them what your rate is so they can then see on their end if that works within their overall budget. And even if you're not working with a PR company, an in-house influencer marketing program is likely going to have a set budget. So that's another reason why I think it's important to be confident when it comes to negotiating with a brand, because it's going to be up to you to ask for a slice of that pie. Another big reason why I think creators should be providing their own rates is because there are a lot of considerations that go into determining what your rate is as an influencer or content creator. And the brand may not be fully aware of all those considerations, or they may not have the same methodology around pricing that you have. As creators, we know that there is a lot more that goes into your rate than just your follower count. That's a relevant consideration for an influencer campaign along with your engagement rate, but that's not the whole puzzle. And if we're talking about a content creation or a UGC campaign where the content isn't going on your social media feed, the follower count isn't relevant to the rate at all. So with that said, a creator who is a well-known influencer in a particular niche may be able to charge more for certain content creation campaigns, especially if dark posting or paid usage rights are involved. But that higher rate is going to be based on the value of the creator's image and likeness, not necessarily the value of their social media following. So again, that just goes to show that there are a lot of different considerations to keep in mind when setting a rate. Depending on your niche and the type of content you create, you may also have production expenses that the brand may not be aware of. For example, I'm an outdoor creator, so when I'm creating content for a brand or an influencer campaign, I often have travel expenses along with possible permit fees. So it can take significantly longer to create hiking or camping content too than it takes to create at home. And so those are all things that I consider when it comes to setting my rate based on the particulars of a specific campaign. And so those are kind of all the reasons why I like to see creators calculating your own rate based on what you believe is fair compensation for the work that you're responsible for. But with that said, there are few hard and fast rules when it comes to negotiating brand deals. So if you're in a situation where the brand has a firm limited budget in place for working with a specific creator and they're clear on the deliverables and general terms they're looking for, I do think it's appropriate for the brand to let the creator know what their budget is for the campaign. And I'm really talking about situations that are kind of like a take it or leave it situations where there isn't really room to negotiate. Now, if that happens, you as a creator can always still try to negotiate a higher rate or different terms, but if there is that wiggle room to negotiate, I like to see both parties being able to come to the table to ask for what they need. So moving on into negotiation tips. So the tips I'm going to share today are hopefully going to help you in the process of negotiating your own brand deals, because I completely understand that it can be really intimidating, especially if you're working with a huge company and it's a brand that you love and you really want to work with them. And so you don't want to potentially miss out, but you still deserve to be paid fairly for the work that you do and the value that you provide to a brand. So I want to make sure that you're equipped with some negotiation tips and feel confident negotiating your brand deals. So the first negotiation tip that I'm going to share is don't be afraid to negotiate. I think it's very normal and expected to negotiate the terms of a business deal or a contract. And sometimes creators can get so excited about working with a brand that they just automatically accept the initial offer without trying to negotiate any of the three buckets that I just discussed. And I think this often stems from a fear of losing out on the deal. And that's a completely normal and valid fear. But if a brand really wants to work with you, they aren't going to walk away just because you asked for a higher rate or different deliverables. They may say no, but you don't get what you don't ask for, and you never know the amount of flexibility that a brand may have. And if the brand isn't willing to work with you to come to an agreement that you feel is mutually beneficial, then that just might not be an aligned partnership, which leads me into negotiation tip number 2. Know when to say no. You should always go into a potential brand deal negotiation prepared to walk away and say no if you can't come to an agreement. A big piece of knowing when to walk away is knowing what your bottom line is. For example, if your rate for what a brand is asking for is usually $3,000, but you've decided that you're willing to negotiate down to $2,000 if necessary, but no lower than that, that's your bottom line. And then the brand comes back to you with a firm budget of $700 and no flexibility regarding the terms or deliverables, that's probably going to be a situation where you want to walk away. You're not going to be able to get to that place where it's mutually beneficial. So, of course, that doesn't have to be, walking away immediately. Again, you can always try to negotiate, but knowing your bottom line and knowing that you can always say no is one of the most important tools that you can have in your negotiation toolkit. So this next tip is along the same lines as the last one, and that is to know your BATNA. Now, this is an acronym, BATNA, and that stands for the best alternative to the negotiated agreement. And essentially, it's asking what your best alternative is if the agreement doesn't work out and the brand deal falls through. And knowing your BATNA can help to take the pressure off of landing the deal because it gives you a backup plan if you have to say no and walk away. So, what can a best alternative look like in the context of a brand deal? So if your brand deal falls through, it frees you up to possibly take on other brand deals that might be more aligned or that might pay you better. It's going to free up the time that you were going to have to spend creating content and going back and forth, negotiating the contract, making revisions, possibly chasing down a payment if the brand is showing you that maybe they're not so easy to work with. It's going to allow you to explore other ways to earn income potentially. It's going to give you flexibility to potentially work with a competitor brand because you no longer have an exclusivity obligation. So there are a lot of potential alternatives if a brand deal doesn't work out. So figure out what your best alternative is going to be for a campaign. And this is also going to help you calculate what that bottom line number is that I discussed in the last tip. So the next negotiation tip is a tactical one that you want to use if you're presenting your rate to a brand, and that is to start high. Now, not unreasonably high, of course. There should always be reasoning behind the rate that you set, but you want to start high so that you have room to potentially come down to the number that you're ultimately looking for. So let's say that after considering all of the deliverables and the terms of the brand deal, your rate is $5,000. That's what you're looking for. That might not be your bottom line, like we talked about a little while back, but that's the rate that you want. If you immediately provide the brand a rate of $5,000, you don't have any wiggle room for them to negotiate. And you should always expect that brands are going to want to negotiate the rate. They may accept it outright, in which case that's amazing, but that might also be a time to raise your rates and your expectations. But it's very normal for there to be some sort of negotiation, especially when it comes to a rate. So in my example, if you quoted $5,700 instead of $5,000, you're going to have more room to work with the brand to get to that number that you're looking for. And being able to be flexible like that is also going to help you maintain relationships with brands. It's going to make you easy to work with. It helps brands feel like they're getting a good deal as well. So being strategic with the rate you ultimately provide can help you in a variety of different ways. Negotiation tip number 5 is to understand the brand's goals. So what is the brand's ultimate objective from working with you or from a particular campaign? Are they looking to drive direct conversions? Are they looking to build brand awareness? Are they launching a new product that they want to get in front of as many eyes as possible? Are they looking to build trust with a particular type of audience? There are a lot of different goals that a brand might have when working with an influencer or content creator. I think there's often an assumption that brands are just looking for sales and that's the only reason they ever work with influencers. And oftentimes that's not the primary goal. And truthfully, working with influencers specifically may not actually be the best way to drive conversions. In my opinion, if that's the ultimate goal that the brand is looking for, then they need to be putting ad dollars behind the content, which means either acquiring paid usage rights or whitelisting rights from the creator. Now, on the other hand, if a brand is looking to build brand awareness, for example, they're launching a new product, they want to get it in front of as many eyes as possible. That's a situation where I think an influencer campaign can be really beneficial for a brand. And you might not see or calculate the same direct ROI or return on investment from the campaign the same way that you would if you were measuring direct conversions. But there are other metrics a brand can look at, like the overall reach or click-through rates, to help judge the success of a campaign. So let me give an example of some of the benefits from a product launch awareness campaign. So let's say there's a hiking shoe company and they're launching a new hiking boot and they're working with 50 different outdoor influencers to promote this new boot. Now, each influencer's post is going to reach different people, But chances are people who follow a lot of outdoor creators are going to see these new hiking boots multiple times because more than one creator that they follow is sharing them. And someone who's following a lot of outdoor creators is probably someone who's an avid hiker or an outdoorsman and woman, so that they're more likely to be someone who's going to buy a pair of hiking boots in the first place. And getting your product in front of a potential customer multiple times, especially an ideal customer, is incredibly valuable. So the brand may not be able to point to one influencer after that campaign and say, this is the person that drove all of these sales, but they're building awareness around a new product. And over time, people are going to start trusting the product or becoming curious about the product. So sometimes it can be hard to quantify what the ROI is when the goal isn't conversions. But I think that's why knowing a brand's goals is so important, because that can help you adjust the deliverables or terms of the brand deal during the negotiation process to make them more aligned with the brand's ultimate goal. Now, my last tip for you today comes after negotiations are complete, and that is to make sure that you always get a contract. After you've come to an agreement with the brand regarding the deliverables, the terms, and your compensation, you always want to memorialize everything with a written contract. This is going to help protect you, and it's also going to protect the brand. And I have an article about why creators always need a brand deal contract that I will link in the show notes, but it is a really important step in the overall brand deal process. Now, the contract is most likely going to come from the brand, so make sure that you read it carefully. Make sure that it accurately reflects all of those terms and deliverables and the rate that you just agreed to, and make sure there are no surprises. You also want to make sure that you understand everything that you're agreeing to. There are a lot of little things that can crop up in a brand deal contract that you may not be aware of. So reading it and understanding it is incredibly important. And if you need your own brand deal contract as an influencer or a content creator, I have templates for both in the Legal Influence Contract Shop, which will also be linked in the show notes. So I have an influencer agreement, which is geared towards creators who are working with brands on influencer campaigns where you're responsible for posting the content on your social media. And then I also have a content creator contract, and that's really for content creators and UGC creators who are working with brands solely to create content that is being licensed by the brand. And then I also offer a bundle if you need both contract templates. So you can find all of those in the Legal Influence Contract Shop. I hope today's episode leaves you feeling more confident when it comes to negotiating brand deals. Remember, you are your own best advocate and you don't get what you don't ask for. So if you like today's episode, I would love it if you could review and leave a rating on your favorite podcast app and give the Legal Influence podcast a follow. And if you know any influencers or content creators who could benefit from today's episode, please send it on to them. Talk to you soon.